Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another study on the Bible. Last week we looked at love, true love. What true love is a very deep-seated concern for another person's both physical and spiritual well-being. Well, today we are going to be looking at the greatest act of love ever shown to anyone. We're going to be looking at Christ's crucifixion, Christ's sacrifice, his death. To begin with, if we turn to Romans chapter 5 and verse 8. Romans chapter 5 and verse 8. This tells us the love that God had for us. It says, "But God commendeth his love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us." Okay, now a lot of people will say, well, I know Christ died. And a lot of people would even say, I know Christ died for me and to forgive me of my sins. But do we really know the details, the true details of what Christ actually had to go through and the horrific punishment and torture that he went through for us? And so that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at some more of the details and truly what he went through for us. If we turn to Matthew chapter 26, this will get us started. Matthew chapter 26, verses 37 and 38. Now, this is leading up to the cross. We're not at the cross yet. We're at this passage, we're in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Christ is praying to the Father that the cup should pass from him, that if it was possible, he wouldn't even have to go to the cross. But if we look, Matthew 26, 37 and 38 says, "And he," talking about Christ, "took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and began to be sorrowful and very heavy." Sorrowful and very heavy. This is not just a typical sorrow. This is a very, very deep sorrow and a very heavy sorrow. And then in the next passage, it even says agony. "Then saith he unto them, My soul is exceeding sorrowful, even unto death." You know, a lot of people will use the expression, well, man, I'm just so sad I could die. That's what Christ is saying here, and he's meaning it. He is meaning it. Christ being God on earth, and we'll go over that in another lesson, but Christ being God on earth knew what the cross was to hold for him. So when he says, I'm sorrowful even unto death, he meant it. If we turn to Luke 22, chapter 22 and verse 44, this is going to show us some more details of just how sorrowful he was. Now this is still in the Garden of Gethsemane. We're not even close to the cross yet, really. Luke 22 and verse 44 says, "And being in an agony," so not just sorrow or very heavy, but even agony, agonizing about it. "Being in an agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was as it were great drops of blood falling down to the ground." Now that is a very strange expression. Your sweat as great drops of blood falling down to the ground. You know, I've never heard that in any other place, really. I could be wrong, but I've never heard that anywhere else. And the reason being is because I believe that this is a actual description of what he was going through. Not a simile or a metaphor, but an actual description. There is actually a condition called hematidrosis. Okay, I'm going to spell this for you in case you want to look it up. Hematidrosis. Hematidrosis. And it is where somebody is in so much stress and so much anxiety about something that their fight or flight response will kick in, and the blood vessels in their face will burst, and they will sweat blood. Blood will pour out of their face like sweat because of so much stress, so much sorrow, so much agony. In fact, Leonardo da Vinci wrote about a soldier returning from battle. He wrote about him having sweat as blood due to the fact that he had seen some very, very intense scenes in battle. Today we call that post-traumatic stress disorder, a very extreme case, but Christ would have had a pre-traumatic stress disorder. He hasn't even gone to the cross yet, but he knows how horrible it is going to be. He knows. A lot of times, when we think about something and what we're going to have to do in the future, sometimes we'll get stressed out. And the more we think about it, the more we get stressed out. That's called overthinking, right? Christ did not overthink the cross. What he was going through here was appropriate for what he was going to have to go through in the future. Going a little bit further, okay, we're not to the cross yet, but we're getting closer. And they have now arrested Christ and are holding him. Luke chapter 22, verses 63 and 64. And the men that held Jesus, so they've arrested him, they're holding him. The men that held Jesus mocked him and smote him, hit him. And when they had blindfolded him, they struck him on the face and asked him, saying, Prophesy, who is it that smote thee? So they're mocking him, but now they're hitting him, slapping him. I think one of the other accounts say with an open palm, but they're hitting him, slapping him, and mocking him. We're not even to the cross yet, and he is taking punishment for us. He was taking punishment in the Garden of Gethsemane, thinking about the cross. He is now taking physical punishment from those that held him. We're not to the cross yet, and he is being punished for us. John 19 and verse 1 kind of goes a little bit further and describes how far they went in these beatings. It says, John 19 verse 1 says, Then Pilate therefore took Jesus and scourged him. Now that's really all the detail that it is told to us here in Scripture. It just says they scourged him. And so we kind of read that and just go on. But if we look back at history, we will see the intense whippings, floggings, scourgings that happened at Christ's time. Through history, once again, we can see that they used something called a cat of nine tails. That was a whip that extended a ways, and then it branched out into these smaller whips, often 9 of them. And inside these smaller whips that branched out, they would embed shards of stone, pieces of bone, even metal. So what would happen is, as they whipped the person, those fingers or branches would come out and hit, and those shards of stone and bone and metal would dig into the flesh. And then as they pulled, it would rip the flesh, tear the flesh. They would torture Christ at this point, a true torture. Josephus, a famous historian of that era, actually wrote about these scourgings that happened. Not Christ's specifically, but very similar ones. In his book, The War of the Jews, pages 303 and 304, in case you want to read that, it says, where he was whipped till his bones were laid bare. So a similar scourging, they whipped that person until you could see the bones, most likely on the back, as the person would be tied and leaned forward. They would whip the back, and so the ribs and the spine would be exposed. A truly horrific punishment. And while those details are not actually explicitly described in scriptures, we can see some evidence to back some of this up. If we look at Isaiah chapter 52, Isaiah 52. I'll get to it here in just a second. And verse 14. Now, this is prophecy speaking about Christ and what he is going to go through. Isaiah 52 and verse 14 says, "As many were astonished at thee, his visage, or his image, his appearance, was so marred more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men." What that is saying is that he was beaten to the point where he didn't even look human anymore. Now, I've seen movies, action movies where somebody was beaten or hit, punched, whatever. I've never seen someone beaten to the point where they don't look human. That is an extreme punishment and torture. Beaten to the point where you don't even look human anymore. Christ truly suffered for us. Finally, let's go to John 19 and verse 18. All of these things leading up to the cross, and there's many more details of things leading up to the cross that we're not going to go into because of time restraints, but he was beaten so bad that he couldn't even carry his own cross after a certain point, and they had to pull someone else from the crowd to carry it for him. They pushed a crown of thorns down on his head. I'm sure not small thorns, but very large ones, very painful. They mocked him even further, spit on him, beat him even more than what we have looked at so far. And finally, John 19 and verse 18, all the accounts say something very similar to this. It says, where they crucified him. Where they crucified him. And that's really all we're told. We're told that he was nailed to the cross. But we're really not given much more details about how they crucified him. Once again, if we look through history, it will show some more proof about exactly what happened to him, other crucifixions that happened at that time. Once again, we're told that he was nailed, his hands and his feet. Historians show that it was most likely not what we would call the palm, right here, where they nailed him, because it would tear the flesh out, and there's also bones in here that they could hit and break. We're told that Christ would have no broken bones. But most likely what they did was they actually nailed him through the joint of the hand, what we call the wrist today. There's actually a space there that would be where you could put a nail, but in that space there is a bundle of nerves that go to feed the rest of the hand. As they would nail through, would hit that bundle of nerves, and would be excruciating pain for somebody. Once again, as the nails were in the hand and the feet, you would be held up, similar to this. But the weight of your body would drag down. That would cut off the airflow, and the diaphragm would droop to where you couldn't breathe. The only way to sustain life, if you will, on the cross would be to pull yourself up, take a breath, and then let your body droop or slouch back down. And eventually, the person would die of strangulation, of just choking, however you want to call it. They broke the legs of the two thieves on either side of Christ to hasten their death. As they came to Christ, he was already dead. Because of the immense beatings that he took, he would not last as long on the cross. But as we picture the open wounds on his back, him having to pull himself up and drop back down, his open wounds scraping the rough wood of the cross, he went through a horrific death for us. Went through horrific punishment, persecution, torture for us. To bring all of this back around full loop, I want to look once again at Romans chapter 5 and verse 8. Romans chapter 5 and verse 8 says, once again, "But God commendeth his love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us." After looking at some of the details of Christ's death, that most likely has a different meaning for us now. That verse has a very different meaning for us. If anybody has any questions or comments, you can comment below on the video here, or send me a private message directly. If anybody has any prayer requests for strength, comfort, forgiveness, whatever you might need, then we would I would ask that you once again either comment on the video, or you can send me a message directly. And once again, I hope everybody has a good day and a peaceful day.